Brendan Fraser. You star in the FX series Trust as James Fletcher Chace, who works for oil tycoon J. Paul Getty. First off, how did this opportunity come your way to play this role?
Got a call from Danny Boyle to discuss the role. Actually, it was a different role. It was the one for Little Paul, who is played by Michael Esper. We had a nice conversation. Danny told me he had seen The Affair, which was on Showtime, I think the year before last. And he said a really nice thing to me. He told me that he liked the way that I had repositioned myself. I've reinvented myself as some sort of quasi-urban cowboy, I guess. That's another story. Anyway, so we had a nice chat about this. I let him know that I was a big fan of his, have been, that he and I actually had met once before. It was at the podium when he won, I think it was Broadcast Critics Award for Slumdog Millionaire. And I handed it to him along with Elizabeth Banks. And, you know, he was busy that award season, needless to say. And I said, you know what, put our names together in a browser. And he was like, oh, look, there we are. We did meet. Nice to see you again. Anyway, so we had a nice chat. He told me a bit about what was going on with the project, that there was a competing one that Ridley was doing. But he said, I think there's room enough for both of us. I think there is. He was right. And then he told me, he sounded almost a little bit apologetic, and he didn't need to be. But he said, "Would you mind doing something to put yourself on, on tape, as it were?" I said, "Absolutely, of course." So I cobbled together a few of the scenes of the project that I had read that Simon Beaufoy had written, called Trust, and I read some sides into the eye hole like this, another part of this house, and sent it off to him. And he wrote back shortly thereafter, saying, hey, great, we'd love you to do this, but would you consider doing the character of Chace, Fletcher Chace? And my heart leaped for joy. I thought that was spoken for by someone far cooler than I could ever aspire to be, because it's such a great part. Chace is a former G-man, CIA operative. He really existed, but there's not that much known about him. I don't know if it's for nefarious reasons or other ones. I mean, maybe his file was redacted, but it is known that in a biography he may not have been exactly the best agent, because he may have given away compromising information. I don't know what the story is, but he went on to work for Getty after working for the shop, and that was fine by Getty. He was impressed by slow talking, long walking Texans, and he hired him. So he was Getty's sometimes fixer, sometimes repairman. He didn't always fix everything, but he did respond first. He did negotiate. He stepped in as a liaison. He investigated. He went to find out what happened to the third Getty boy, who was John Paul Getty III, Little Paul. Oh, I said Little Paul before. Actually, it was Big Paul. That's Esper's part. It was great in this. Fantastic. When Esper says, when you have everything, what is it that you value? I'm paraphrasing that. It broke my heart. I was telling you about what? You know what? I've completely spaced it off. What were we talking about?
Just about how you became involved in the role and what.
Well, it was like that, yeah. So anyway, so he went to look for the kidnapped grandson, and he wound up carrying on the negotiation with local mobsters and mafiosos and a lot of lawyers. But in the depiction of us on screen on FX with Trust, the character of Fletcher Chace he's a little bit more esoteric. He's He's in the scene. He steps out of it occasionally. He's there to, interestingly as it is that we're talking to one another and everybody else out there watching, by breaking what we call the fourth wall. But we do that all the time when we watch television screens and newscasters. They're doing that all day long. But in a dramatic work, when it happens in the format of a driven narrative, there's something sort of thrilling about it. And that's a simple conceit as old, if not older, than Shakespeare speaking in soliloquy, or a Greek chorus telling its audience exactly what's going on out here. So look, like I said, it was there's a lot to wrap my arms around with this role, and I relished the opportunity. We shot in Rome last summer. Boy, was it ever hot! Let me tell you. And I was wearing this hat. I was the only guy in Rome with a cowboy hat on, and I think everybody else wanted it. I was like, this one's mine. I know, because I bought it. Oh, by the way, I bought all the hats that Fletcher Chace wears in the show, but that's another story. Anyhow, shooting in Rome was fantastic. The whole project had a feeling of authenticity, since that's where the action and the kidnapping took place, and certainly not to overlook that it was shot in Calabria in the south of Italy too. And in Trust, the spirit of the project becomes Italian filmmaking at one point, when a whole episode is devoted to the home life of the mafia and the very real concerns and challenges that they have, you know, trying to do business with the world's richest man. And the dialect that they spoke was Calabrian. I do not speak Italian, but I'm told that it's vastly different. So there's a real sense of authenticity from having worked there, and of course because we worked in the UK, in and around London, and on location at the Manor Home. There's a real sense of authenticity at the period being 1973, and the concerns that are brought into the fold politically, the climate of rebellion and standing up against the man, and that there was the Nixon years, and the war in Vietnam was dragging on. It's all it all feeds into the look of the show quite carefully, and it's a delight to watch when so many of the early 70s filmmaking techniques are repurposed to what we're seeing with our very contemporary 21st eyes right now. So that's Trust, and that's who I play, and I hope y'all got a chance to check it out. If you haven't, there's still time.
Yeah, and since this character is, so much is known about the Gettys, but not as much is known about, Chace historically. How did what was the process of building this character? What his personality would be like? What, what the tone of, of the kind of role would be?
Well, there's a lot to work with. He had a background in intelligence. He had a service record. I made a choice that I don't know if it's accurate or not, that he was in the Navy branch. So what he was doing during the war years on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, it may have been less of the heavy lifting and fighting and more of the covert intelligence gathering branch, and variety of covert action and warfare. So that gave a real sense of purpose to who he was, to ground him. That he was a Stetson-wearing Texan was something that our writer Simon Beaufroy made quite clear when it seems like Chace had a hat for almost every occasion, including a funeral. In the first episode, he has a black Stetson. You only see it once, but he's got one. He is he's kind of the liaison, almost the moral conscience of the project, which takes on huge themes of having and not having, fathers and sons, mothers and sons. What do we do when we have everything, and ask, what do we value, truthfully? And he has a through line himself that is slowly revealed, and there's a payoff near roundabout episode 10. So I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. If you want to find out, take a look. The project encompassed, I think, the best of what we have with narrative filmmaking and with episodic television in the format that it's played out over the season. It functions in telling a story less like a one-off, start to one and done, and it plays to the strength of having this be an episodic, much like chapters in a novel. I was going to be in company of actors I greatly admire. I worked with Donald Sutherland back in 1993. He told me, when I reminded him this the other night, he went, "Oh yes, that's right, you bought a Honda." He loves cars. I'm like, "That's right, I did, didn't I?" It was a Honda Prelude. That had the big engine, stick shift. Yeah, I was living large. Memories. And Hillary, Hillary Swank, who I'd met years and years ago, but first time I'd had a chance to work with her, is a real team player. She makes a partnership in the relationships she forges and her working practice on set, which is really nice, and makes all the difference. You feel like you really have there's a team player on board, and the cast is rounded out wonderfully by all the UK players and the Italian ones too. There are formidable new performances that I predict in years to come, you're going to be saying, "Wow, I remember them when," or "Oh, that was the guy from Trust," or "She turned in such a good performance, it broke my heart." I mean, there are just gems all along the way of this show. And overall, it's a wild story to think of someone who has that much money, power, resource, can be that meticulous, and to the casual and outside observer and the world, think, how can you be that cold? You wouldn't even fund a portion of the ransom to free your grandson. And we get to take a look inside how Donald Sutherland plays Getty with such zeal and without being apologetic for his taste for power and money and sex and food and drink, and how he forms that into an entity that is so much larger than life, so much so that it consumes him to the point that he just cannot bring himself to share, and in a meaningful way. But somehow there's almost a certain brilliance to it too, especially, and I note more and more in the last, maybe, I'll call it like 5 years, 8 years, since like 2009 at least, we have had far more of an interest that we've paid to the billionaire economically in our society. It's a standard that's held up so much more. And there are arguments to be made that, is this a question of educating the 99% or the 1%? What's the purpose of making trust? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a fair question to ask. I'd be interested to know what anyone thinks. So if there's a comment section, fill it in.
And yeah, Danny Boyle, who's the producer and director of multiple episodes of the show, he has such a distinct visual style, storytelling style. What was it like, getting to actually work with him on this?
He's a delight. He brings out the best in everyone. He credits right away, automatically, wherever a good idea or a useful or helpful one comes from. And if you make a suggestion, or anyone does for that matter, you're never made to feel like as if you spoke out of turn, or you haven't got the stripe to make that contribution. No. He's someone who pays attention to so many sources, and he has time for everyone, no matter who they are. And he has fans. I mean, Danny Boyle's in town shooting. There were Italian fans who came there who wanted to meet him. He took a moment always to say hello and chat with them in a sincere way. And that sort of individual is inspiring. That's someone who I absolutely hope to work with as often as I can, or at least take a page out of that playbook and ascribe it to my own professional life and going forward, and notch off a standard that I hope to maintain in however you comport yourself in this media savvy world, no matter who you are. And he's a lovely guy and a lot of fun to hang out with. He takes risks in the best way possible. He'll shoot something that even though you might not use it, it's better to have it and not use it than to want it and not have it. He'll bank something. I can give you an example. For those of you who haven't seen the show yet, Fletcher Chace, in episode 10, and I'm not giving anything away, there was an idea that he might put forward an idea in narration that if he had anything different to do, what would he have done? And we were talking about this. We were talking about the notion of, I think it's called an escalier moment, which is when you're going down the escalator, you're thinking, oh, I should have done this. Oh, I should have said that. I mean, how many times have we had sort of a second guessing, and you walk away from a conversation, or you think, oh, I really could have burned him if I said the, you're never going to be able to do that because you can't turn the clock back. But if you're making films or television, in a way you can. And he seized upon that by saying if Fletcher Chace had any regrets at all about how he went through this journey of trying to find his way back, like this kid, his way back to his family. And for instance, what I just told you right now would have played through narration. And one night we were working in this giant plaza in Rome, and there were huge cauldrons, burning cauldrons that were there from the art department. And he said, let's just burn the $250,000 in the briefcase. I was like, I'm down. So there's a lost shot somewhere of Fletcher Chace burning $250,000 that he can't give away to the mob. But you won't, I'm just describing it. You want to really, that's right, folks. I'm telling you what you're not going to see on Trust. That's an example of the kind of filmmaker Danny is. He takes those chances and, finds out later, hey, it works or it doesn't work. I really love that spirit.
And as you mentioned, there was another project about the similar material from Ridley Scott recently, All the Money in the World.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how, both projects come at similar stories in such drastically different ways, because this does feel so different from the film. Did you see the film when it came out, or have you seen it since you've made this? And what were your thoughts about, almost an out-of-body experience, seeing it portrayed in a different way?
Like I told you earlier, I think there's, like you said, there's room for both of these. It's a big story. What happened in the Getty family in the 70s was really the middle of it. You need to remember that, I guess you could call it an origin story. And with luck, maybe if we get picked up for a second season, we'll go back in time. And I'm not saying this from entirely a self-serving purpose, but maybe just a little bit. There's another thing about Fletcher Chace is that he's, as Danny and I had discovered in a conversation early on, he's somewhat of a time traveler. I brought that up with him because of Fletcher Chace's ability to almost describe time as you would do, as a sommelier would come to describing wines. He's a connoisseur of sorts about what has happened in our world in terms of history. And because he's the voice of moral authority and sometimes liaison, he breaks fourth wall to speak directly to our viewers. He has a sort of a magic realistic element to him also. And there's, like I said, not that much really known about him. It liberated me, it liberated the project to be able to step away from Trust being categorized strictly as a biographical or historical depiction, and underline that this project and this character has the ability to just be there to entertain. And if you take away something from it that's meaningful to you from it, then I'd like to think that we've done our job. So that said, that's closer to the spirit of Danny's approach to this material. I can't speak for a world-class other filmmaker in Ridley Scott and his creative process, apart from what I've seen on the screen, which I find engaging. I can't look away whenever I watch one of his films. I grew up watching them. I'm a big fan. How else do I say it? And it's affirming that directors of this caliber are both interested in the same subject around about the same time. So it's, it has relevance insofar as from my perception of it. Now, if it seems like the stories in All the Money in the World and Trust have a sense of disparity between the two of them, it's really comes down to the style and the approach of either director. And again, it's interesting to note how we can see a film that's, I don't know, like under 120 minutes or so, and that you have to handpick the most engaging parts and shoot your film to make it as engaging as it needs to be. And with the format of episodic television or streaming or platforms, whatever you want to call it, watching these things on devices and from our hands to flat screen TVs and all that. I mean, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. The challenge becomes really, there's just so much of what we now call content. 3-5 years ago, maybe we might have rolled our eyes at labeling what we watch on these screens as just content by the word alone. I mean, it's a show, it's a movie, but you know what? It is what we watch, and there's so much of it, a preponderance that, honestly, who's going to get around to seeing all that if they're still able to do it in fast forward without commercials or however you circumnavigate? And that's a challenge because it's a much more crowded entity or marketplace or format, whatever you want to call it. But the thing that it comes down to in facing that challenge is really down to the creators to find material that straight up people want to see, want to watch. It's got to be good. And, whenever would you not have that approach to going forward? Well, possibly, but, it would just be it would be counterproductive to not try and wrap your arms around about something that you really care about. And I certainly did with this material. I'm pretty sure that whoever, and I really, really liked Scott's version of what he found to bring to the screen. And they're separate and distinct in, my opinion of it. But I think if not for entertainment purposes, it's interesting to compare and contrast. That's a long answer to a short question.
Well, I want to congratulate you on this series, and
Thanks.
you know, fingers crossed that we will get to see more of it and Fletcher Chace in the future. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
You got it. It's been a pleasure.